Welcome to Pub Natter, where we record each episode in a different pub in Rutland, the smallest county in England. In each episode, your hosts, Tim and Justin, give a voice to the landlords and landladies and a special guest with a specific area of interest or expertise. We hope you enjoy our chats and it encourages you to go and explore our little county and all it has to offer. Like the motto says, there is much in little.
When rain stops play, it's time for some pub natter.
This episode, which is part 2 of 3, featuring Henry Winter, was recorded a couple of months ago at the Railway Inn, Ketton, Rutland. We discuss football charity work, unsung heroes, David Beckham, Kevin Keegan, press room dynamics, writing, Hugh McIlvenney, Muhammad Ali, prurience, or was that prurience? Nostalgia and football in Ukraine. The chat starts with Henry discussing Leah Williamson.
Yeah, but you know, someone like Leah Williamson, who was the sort of the England captain, she's one of the most impressive people that you can meet. You know, there's a Arsenal involved with an orphanage in Jakarta, and she helps it out, and she doesn't help it out during campaign weeks. She's sending their messages to the kids there. How are you? Do you need a shirt? Do you need a signed program or a thing? Are you okay? You doing your studies? Again, coming back to the sort of good people.
We should hear more about that. We don't hear enough of that.
It's a constant debate in the media. Negativity sells more to an extent. And I mean, I write a lot about those things because I find them interesting. Also, if you're going to interview a player, you can interview them at the training ground, but they've got their teammates going and throwing, you're talking to the posh papers and throwing sort of boots at them. Or you can take them into a hospital where, say, like Jamie Vardy, you know, he will go around sort of Leicester Royal Hospital, whichever one it is, because the club's got great connections with it because of the donations that Vishai made. And the impact he will make is huge. And players open up a bit more. And players, particularly if you take them around hospitals, probably the people, the professionals that they need most are medical experts. And they will just... I remember going around slightly different this way. I went around the Christie, the cancer hospital in Manchester with Owen Hargreaves, who was playing for England at the time. And he got very emotional halfway through. And I said, are you okay? He said, yeah, I've just realised my uncle's in here. And the interview just changed completely because it was not a football interview anymore. It was about family. It was about potential loss. It was about emotion. So, yeah, I mean, you're right. We should do more on... Because they're probably about 5,000 people who work full-time at the 92 clubs on community schemes, whether it's coaching, whether it's running autism courses, whether it's helping the NHS do testing in the stadiums on non-match days. Rugby doesn't do that. No. Cricket doesn't do that. I mean, all the sort of the supposedly smart sports. The one sport, and I get slightly evangelical in defending football here, is that actually goes like COVID, the work that football did in COVID. I rang up Jordan Henderson's getting a lot of stick at the moment because of going off to Saudi, but I rang him up. He was captain of Liverpool at the time. And he was on his running machine and he was sorting out raising millions of pounds from players, from initiatives, from auctions, online auctions for hospitals all over the Northwest. And I could tell you thousands of stories like that.
Do you not think if football supporters knew more about what he was doing, what other players were doing, it would create more respect from the supporters?
I think
difficult, isn't it?
The club
Because
fans know.
I think sometimes if a player kind of advertises or acknowledges the charity work they're doing, then they get he does a lot for charity kind of, and they get the mickey taken out of them, and they're accused of doing it for their own benefit, for their own profile.
Can't win, yeah.
But if they keep quiet about it, nobody knows they do it, and then people just again believe the kind of the media version of that player. You know, and we see them all with the diamond earrings and the flash cars and all the rest of it. And there is this perception that they're out of touch and that they don't remember where they came from. But as you're explaining, that in most cases is probably not true.
There's some idiots there. I would say for an elite footballer nowadays, coming back to trust, who do you trust? You know, whether you've got members of your family, can you trust them completely? Can they, you know, the money that gets generated by footballers is just huge, and they're like honeypots, and people sort of, you know, gather around them, and they've not always got the best motives. And then you just see just the perfect setup, like Jude Bellingham. Grew up in Stourbridge, dad a police officer, mother a remarkable woman, and they are just like just a close-knit unit. But, you know, there'll be some, you know, you get agents. See, agents will be contacting players on social media, you know, whereas they used to sort of hang around training grounds and, you know, under 16 matches. Now they can contact them through Instagram, whatever. So it's difficult. I'm not sort of overly protective of them because there's some absolute idiots out there, and you do absolutely batter them when. But I can remember it was about a year ago. Jordan Henderson was involved in an NHS hospital a school which was a school for kids with autism, and I knew some people at the NHS who were going in there, and they said, listen, it might make a piece. Jordan doesn't necessarily want the publicity, but it will help us for, you see, it's about raising awareness and raising funds. And if you get an elite player going into a place like that, the place generates a lot more interest and a lot more money. So, you know, it's kind of the part of the deal. So I went in and followed Jordan around, and it was a lovely sunny day, and all the kids were sort of, you know, running around outside, and obviously there was, you know, some issues with sound and light, and there were 30 kids in the class, and there were 29 outside, and Jordan realised that there was one kid missing, or someone had mentioned to him. He said, well, not all 30 here, one's inside. And Jordan said, why is the kid inside? He said, can't cope with the noise. So Jordan went in, you know, his car was waiting to take him back. This was sort of like Stoke when the car was waiting to take him back to Liverpool. And he just went in, found the kid, and I just saw them sitting in there, just in a room. Her parents were there, and Jordan was just talking to her and just going through. She had a book, a Liverpool book, like a yearbook, and she was going through, just pointing at the players, and he was telling little stories about each player, you know. That's Darwin Núñez, what a character he is, and that's Virgil van Dijk, we love him, he's a god. And you know, her eyes lit up, and you just think, well, how many times would that happen to him on a daily basis? Obviously, that was an extreme case. A lovely kid with autism, couldn't go outside because of the noise, and he stepped in there. But he will go to, and all footballers do this, you know, when they go out, they have to, you know, if they go to the shops, they have to leave an extra half hour, because stopping for selfies and things like that. And I got David Beckham always said, David Beckham was unbelievable. I mean, it was Beatle. I've covered him all over the world, you know, in LA, when England were out in Japan, and it was Beatlemania. God, he handled it so well. And I said, you stop, you sign every single autograph. How do you do it? And he says, because I know that if I don't sign an autograph, it'll either break some kid's heart, or their dad will run off to a newspaper and say, oh, that Beckham, arrogant sod, despite the fact he's almost got RSI signing about 500 autographs. So, look, there's some dickheads out there, but the majority of them are good people.
I'm glad you said that about David Beckham, because I always had a lot of time for David Beckham, and I not so much all the great goals. The way he fought to get back in the team at Real Madrid, and to get back in the England squad under Capello, when he'd basically had been bought for shirt sales, and fought his way back into the team. And the game I remember most about David Beckham was when England lost 1-0 at home in the second leg of the Euro 2000 playoff to Scotland. Yeah. And England were awful in that game, absolutely awful. And I remember David Beckham running around like the kid that's not very good, but would just get in the way and generally make. And he had a knee problem at the time. He had a thing on his knee, and I just remember him giving 110% in an absolutely dire performance just to not lose that match. And that's my memory of David Beckham. I just think he had possibly limited talent, but he worked so hard to make the very, very most of it that he could, in my view,
Yeah,
as a fan.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the
A
view
bit like
of a lot
Kevin
of the
Keegan
fans there.
in his way
Yeah, I
as
was
well.
thinking
Yeah.
of Kevin Keegan. He was that sort of player, wasn't he?
Yeah, Kevin Keegan was remarkable. I had to host an event with him once when he wrote a book, and he said, "Would I come and do a Q&A for him at the Cheltenham Festival?" Not the racing festival, unfortunately. It was the literary festival, and he was.
Hey on why?
Yeah, no, Cheltenham. I've done that. I had a book at Hay on Wye. My God, didn't have quite as many people in the tent.
That's because you can use words like prurient.
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely.
That's why I get invited to those gigs.
Oh, that was. Yeah, but Cheltenham, there were 500 people who paid tickets. It was a charity fundraiser, and they were all going to get a signed copy of his new autobiography. And he was there an hour and a half early, signing autographs for all those who were in the queue. He was in there. I mean, I did the sort of Q&A on stage with him for about an hour, and then said, "Kevin, I've got to get off." And he said, "Fine." And I checked up later, and he was there for 2.5 hours afterwards.
Wow.
Because he
Must have really loved it.
well, he loved it, but also he loved it. Yeah, I love it. I tell you what, he filled a few back pages, but I tell you what, absolute heart of gold. And I mean, obviously not the world's greatest manager, but just that,
No, I
that
keep
commitment.
thinking of Didi Hamann for some reason whenever you say that.
Yeah,
God, that was a terrible moment at Wembley, wasn't it?
I was there.
Was you?
Yeah, last game at Wembley.
that was Paul Scholes' fault. Paul Scholes should have stood in front of the ball and
Paul
delayed
Scholes should
the
have
free
cheated,
kick.
is what you're saying.
Yeah, well, he should have been more professional. That was extraordinary. Watching an England manager resign in the lose.
Well, I was in that stupid queue that you get to get into the tube station at Wembley when it came over people's phones and things that was it was gone. And then we were at the Ginger Sven game, the Wally with the Brolly, and so that was his last
calamity.
game.
Rain. God, what
So
day that was.
Croatia. Was it Croatia?
It
Wasn't
was Croatia.
Yeah.
We somehow contrived to fail to draw with a team that had already qualified.
It was,
We ended
it
up
was
with like
shocking.
5 forwards on the pitch, didn't we?
We lost
defence.
3-2, and the ball going over Carson's left shot. Oh, it's just painful.
You knew, I mean, on nights like that, because it's a sort of late-ish kickoff, you just have to, you're just filing as you go. It's called a runner, so you've got about 1,200 words, and you file in chunks, like 700 words at half time, and then another 200 words at sort of 70 minutes and so on.
Oh, that's a lot of words.
Yeah, but there was a lot to say that night. There was very much a lot to say. And I just took the view, knowing the FA, knowing the situation, seeing the rain, he was out of his depth anyway. I thought it was a ridiculous appointment. So I just went for him the first edition and just said, he's going to be toast before breakfast. And then the next day there was the press conference. And it's just the sort of tricks of the trade. So it was at Stockport Manor, which is a beautiful place that England use. But they have this brutal tradition that the outgoing manager, because he obviously got sacked that morning, the outgoing manager has to do an exit press conference and go round, and he does broadcast, then he does radio, and then he comes into us sort of jackals in the press room, which is when naughty people like me lock the door so radio and television can't get in. And just before he came in, the photographers were moving the table around in which he was going to sit behind. And I knew exactly what they were doing. I said to the snappers, I know exactly what you're doing. And I pointed up, and they just wanted his seat where he would sit and resign to be underneath the fire exit sign. So little things like that. But anyway, he came in, sat down, and then, of course, we laid into him and said, have you seen this headline, the one in the Brolly? He knew that I always thought he was out of his depth, likeable but limited. But I always turn around just to check everyone who's in the room, because with a print lot, the questions are brutal, and you want to make sure that radio and television aren't eavesdropping. I looked around, and there was one very elegant lady at the back, and I thought, I don't recognise her. And then I realised Steve McClown's wife, and she was sitting in there, and I was just thinking, God, you've got to listen to. Okay, you're getting £1 million payoff, but you're seeing the man you love being,
Do you all know each other in that sort of press pack? And
Yeah.
do you? Is it a scrum to ask questions? Do you
No.
kind of agree to take turns, and different people get first go at different conferences? Or
There's a flow There's maybe a slight seniority. Yeah, it's a great dynamic because your best friends are your biggest rivals, and there are places around the country where I've had calls from the office saying, "Oh, your best mate at the Daily Mail has just scooped you on this England story or this Manchester United story," and it makes you physically almost want to pull over onto the hard shoulder and throw up, particularly when it's England related. And yet, when I see them next, I'll go and buy them a drink and say, well done. But that's the one thing we've all got in common, all from different backgrounds, academically, socially, geographically, whatever.
Who do you most admire?
Admire Paul Hayward when he was at the Telegraph because he was a beautiful writer. The guys and women writers I admire most are those who can write against the clock. Anyone can sit in an ivory tower and come up with a clever column. And
when the pressure's on.
I know a few of them. And I admire them, but I'm going, hang on a sec. I've seen Paul Hayward, Martin Samuel, Ollie Holt, individuals like that writing. McIlvanney was more for a Sunday, so he had a bit more time. But writing against the clock, to do that, to hold up a mirror to history, to these events, to these fast-changing events that you cannot predict. I occasionally see people just almost preparing something in advance to game. But, how can you sit down in Barcelona's Nou Camp in 1999 and predict what's going to happen in the last 90 seconds? And I'm still almost recovering from that. And obviously, the story was Manchester United were trailing to Bayern Munich, and then Ferguson made their amazing changes, and they scored 2 goals. I mean, not just to take it to extra time, but just to finish it. And you are going, my first edition that night was, 80 words scrambled on the top of, in a dramatic late turnaround, Alec Ferguson sort of turned history on its head and destroyed Teutonic supremacy with 2 late goals for Manchester United.
I just arrived in Germany on that day.
Right. Oh, well, that's good timing. Yeah.
It was an awful game as well, apart from that last 2 minutes.
But the majority of my piece for my first edition was just slaughtering Ferguson's tactics. And then, of course, you get about 40 minutes to do the rewrite, which is you go and grab some quotes, you go and maybe chat to a couple of sort of former players who do know what they're talking about in the coffee room or whatever. You compose your thoughts and you bang that out. And Ferguson, at the start of next season, about 5 or 6 of the regular Manchester United reporters like me sort of went to see him for pre-season press conference. He said, "I saw your first editions." And the first editions were the ones they got delivered to the very nice hotel in Barcelona. So over breakfast, he was reading about Ferguson tactically inept, playing 3 wingers in midfield on the greatest night of his life. So, but the next edition was better.
So those writers, colleagues that you just listed, what did they all have in common?
Passion and perspective, and a lot of them had boxing. A lot of them had that boxing ability, so they could get ringside, and you could just. So McIlvanney was brilliant at this. Jeff Powell at the Mail, to Paul Hayward when he was at the Telegraph. Martin Samuel, now at the Times, was at the Mail. Ollie Holt, who's at the Mail on Sunday, to be ringside. I don't cover boxing, but just as a sort of reflecting of the sport generally, to be that close and just to sort of sense the fear and the bravery and just see the blood and the gum shield and what it means and the pain, and then just capturing all that, but also almost being back of the Albert Hall or wherever it is, watching it and putting into perspective. So just those 2 skills, to write with passion and perspective, close up and almost like chess-like there, those are the greats of our game.
Well, why have we got so few women?
Sports writers?
Yeah.
I mean, there's some fantastic female sports writers
But
around.
the ratio between men and women.
I think that's changing, and I can absolutely 100% guarantee, and I know from first-hand experience at the Telegraph and at the Times, that there is no obstacle in the pathway. Honestly, if anything, the opposite. If you are a talented female football writer, and there are some outstanding talent coming through, they will get accelerated. I think maybe you don't see it possibly so much on the writing about the men's game, because a lot of the really talented female writers are writing about lionesses and the WSL.
Yeah.
So, but there'll be a crossover.
I think historically as well, it's a bit like construction, which my background has been a very male-dominated world. But like all these things, it's broken down.
Yeah.
And,
One thing they have to accept from the start is that if you want a work-life balance, no chance.
Yeah.
You can't. Otherwise, I've got a family, and I'm fortunate living, where we are. But it's 5 hours a night. It is 7 days a week. It is walking out of maternity suites early with midwife shouting, "It's not all over yet." And I said, "Well, I've got to get a Wembley because it's Rob Lee's debut." There's all that's that didn't go down well. That one. It is, it's missing weddings, it's missing friends' parties. It's, look, that happens in construction. It happens in all walks of life. But if you do want a work-life balance, you simply cannot do it. And it's interesting talking to the sort of next generation coming through. They don't necessarily see it as a linear career. They don't say, "I'm going to do it for 40 years like you've done." They think, "Well, I'm going to do it for 10 years, then I'm going to go off travelling." And I'm going, well, it takes 10 years to get to where the fun starts in this game. When you are in a certain position, you get the games. But
It does at the moment, but it might not in the future.
in terms of...
Time.
Can we just spin back to Hugh McIlvenney, please? Because that's something I particularly wanted to ask you about.
Legend.
One of my favourite sports books I've ever read is McIlvenney on boxing. I'm a big boxing fan, and he wrote he didn't write a book. A book was published, which was a collection of his reports.
Yeah.
The original reports, and some of them had 2 or 3 reports, both before, during, and after the fight on some of the big fights. The sort of the Ali Liston.
Fraser. He did all Rumble in the Jungle. He did all the big ones.
Yeah, and I found it a fascinating look as a social history, because I'm the same age as you, so I was 10, 11, 12 in Ali's heyday.
Yeah.
And didn't really understand. But I can remember at the time, he wasn't particularly universally loved. A lot of people, I remember thinking that he lost to Ken Norton. Now, you ask anybody, "Oh, Ali was great. We loved Ali. We always loved Ali." But I think, and this is the same with a lot of people, especially people that once they've passed on, we have a kind of rosy view of them.
But don't you think that Ali's reputation was as much shaped in the public consciousness by his appearances on Parkinson? And I think when you saw him in there, people were just sort of so bowled over by his charisma. Obviously, a lot of people would have watched his amazing craft in the ring, but it's just that personality that just shone through in those programs.
Yeah, but I think our memory of him, and possibly others, our memory of him is not the same as how people felt at the time. And one of the things I liked about the book is that you got a snapshot of what people thought. I mean, nobody thought Ali could beat Liston. Nobody gave him a prayer, and he did. And of course, now we all look back and say, "Well, of course it was going to beat Liston." But and I like sports reporting, as a little snapshot of social history.
Yeah.
And I just wondered, if you look back to late 80s, 90s, do you ever go back and look at a report that you wrote 25, 30 years ago and see what you wrote at the time, and how you recall those events?
I'll be
now?
horrified. I'll be horrified by the misspelling of prurience. I would be... Actually, if you look at the journalism now, we've really moved on as an industry from covering headers and volleys. I think, in boxing terms, back then, they would have captured Ali as a social phenomenon, but it would be mainly about his ability in the ring. Now, I mean, the new generation of sports writers coming through in particular, they're very much... some of them are real activist writers, brilliant writers, great reporters, eloquent writers, but they're very campaigning. Every piece has got an edge to it. Is it sports washing? Is it financial impropriety? Is it diversity? There's so many issues that get played out on the sports pages, which would have been just reserved for the news pages, the political pages, the op-ed pages, opinion editorial pages. And the sports pages would have just been left to headers and volleys. But now, I mean, I've done. I interviewed Maguire today. Actually, to be fair, a lot of it is headers and volleys, but then a lot of it is about how people deal with how mentally tough they are. So, again, it comes back to your point, Tim, about how open and expressive they are, and there's a lot of hinterland to footballers away from the pitch, and I think that does come out, that sort of campaigning element. So coming back to your point about comparing it now, it's light and day. It's far more expansive, the writing now, about an individual, about his character, about his family, about his foibles, about his strengths on the pitch, his strengths off it. So I think some of the writing out there now, whether it's The Athletic, whether it's some of the writers on The Guardian, the tabloids, can people be a bit snooty about them, but there's some fantastic columnists in there who get their message out just so quickly and, spikily and compellingly.
So it's a bit like, they say you can't compare footballers now with then. It's a bit like you can't compare writers now with then.
Yeah, if I looked at some of my first match reports, I go, oh my God, it's just sort of, cliched. But it is brutally competitive. I mean, we bury colleagues, we look after colleagues. It is it's strange because even though it's a very unhealthy profession, it's the happiest profession. Every sports desk I've ever been on is known as the toy department. And it was a bit of a stupid thing I did, but when the Ukraine war started, I've got friends in Kyiv, and I thought, I can't just write about this. I'm going to go and cover a game over there. So the Ukrainian Super League started up again, Pro League started up. And I said to the office, there's a Shakhtar Donetsk playing, I think it was Metalist Kharkiv in Kyiv this weekend. First game, it will be quite a story. Obviously, empty stadium, air raid sirens. It will, make an interesting read. And they said, well, you can go. And then the foreign desk were going, are you sure? And then I had to go on a sort of hostile awareness course and a sort of kidnap awareness course. And halfway through that, I was going, oh God, they start tickling my teeth. Tickling my toes. I'm toast. So, but you've got to go and see things like that. And
so
that's
presumably you flew into Poland, or
yeah, you go to Krakow, and I got picked up by a car which took me to the border, and you have to walk across the border. And of course, sort of, a male, they're basically saying, why haven't you got a gun? Why aren't you at the front line? I'm going, I'm British. And they said, what are you doing? And then I got picked up by an ex-Secret Service guy who drove me, stopped at all the sort of control points along the way. And then we got into Kyiv. And the director of communications at Shakhtar Donetsk was slightly surprised that journalists had come all this way to cover a match. And he came and also presented me almost like a medal with my accreditation, my lanyard to go over my head. And he said, this is accreditation not just for today's match, but for the rest of the season. And I said, mate, I'm in and out. I'm just doing one match. And then I got up. But, you have to go and see those things. You can, coming back to the point earlier, you can sit in your ivory tower. I could sit in the corner of the railway and sort of, write a nice piece from afar. But you've got to go.
Yeah. Thanks for listening to part 2 of this Pub Natter podcast. Part 3 will be released shortly, and in the next episode we discuss Hillsborough, Twitter, policing football, the dentist chair incident, gay footballers, trophy predictions, the Euros, living in Rutland, Harrison and Dunn, and Lou Macari.
So that's a wrap, and thank you for listening to our latest Pub Natter. If you visit timothyives.com/pubnatter, you will find photos, links, and more information about each episode. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and please subscribe to ensure you don't miss a pub or one of our amazing guests. The Pub Natter theme tune is by Tom Arnold. That was a Pub Natter broadcast.